in 2017, I was dumped twice. First, I was dumped by my partner, who I'd been with for 3.5 years. And her reason was simple. Ryan, you just never listen to me, to your parents, or to anyone. Well, just 8 weeks later, I was dumped again. A manager that I'd hired to work in a company that I ran at the time handed in his notice. And he said, Ryan, I'm off. And it's not me, it's you. You never listen to me, to your team, to our customers, to anyone. Well, I took these dumpings really badly, and I decided I was going to do something about it. I was going to join a public speaking club, Toastmasters, so that next time someone tells me that I don't listen, I can explain to them why they're wrong. So maybe my intentions were bad, but I turned up at the first Toastmasters meeting and I saw something amazing, because after the speeches and the speakers sat down after the break, other people stood up and had listened to their speeches enough to give them feedback. And I was blown away by that. I could see straight away I had a big problem in my life. I never listened to anyone. If only somebody had told me that. Well, that was back in 2017. 4 years later, I had made evaluation such a big part of Toastmasters and of my life that when I first entered the Toastmasters evaluation competition, I managed to win it. I was the most surprised person in the room. And later on in this workshop, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened on that day. But this workshop is not actually about me. It's about you and what you can do with your evaluation skills and some ways that we can improve it. To make sure that we can communicate, even though there's a lot of you, I've brought a tool along with me, which some of you might recognize. It's this, it's Mentimeter. And so this is one Toastmasters meeting where you won't be asked to turn off your phone. What I'm going to ask you to do instead is either on your phone or on your PC, head to menti.com, that's MENTI.com, and use this passcode, which is 62030868. It's on your screen. Nice and easy to do on your phone. You can also do it on your PC. And when you drop into the meeting, just press the I'm here button so we know that you're with us. Because Menti is a really easy way for me to get your feedback as we go. Hey, we have our first member. Someone's here. So I'll give you another 30 seconds while more people join the Menti. That's it. So just again, head to menti.com, phone or PC, and use that passcode 62030868. I hope no one minds the sound and the glare from this light. Where I am at the moment, I'm actually in Niederau, Austria, and I am standing on the roof balcony of a bar called the Staffler, because it's the best Wi-Fi in town. This hotel has more powerful Wi-Fi than all the other hotels I went to combined. So I thought, this is where I need to be for Toastmasters. I hope you don't mind. Okay, we got 13 of you in. More people will join as we go. So I am going to keep moving. And I'm just going to quickly maximize that screen. Show me a second. Lovely. Okay, so how about a warm-up question? First question that I have for you is nice and easy. For how long have you been a Toastmaster? So for how long have you been a Toastmaster? You'll be able to press a button on your phone. That gives us an idea of how experienced our audience is. And I suspect I could have gone with another one because this has been advertised at district level rather than over 3 years. I probably could have done over 10 years. A couple of heads nodding. Lovely. So we've got a really experienced audience here tonight, which means that I'm not going to mess around. I'm going to make sure that we get through this and get to Q&As as well, because everyone, I'm sure, has brought their own questions and their own challenges when it comes to evaluations. So what is this workshop all about? Well, I'm going to tell you, because I think that's a very good question. Some of the things that we are going to learn in this 40-minute workshop and the Q&A, we're going to learn why and when we give feedback, because that when, I think, is really important to Toastmasters and to evaluation. We're going to look at how to make feedback useful. And I believe what we're going to learn and discuss is not just useful in Toastmasters, but also in wider business. We're going to look at 3 ways that Toastmasters make evaluations hard on themselves. I used to do all these 3 things when I started in Toastmasters, when I gave my first evaluations. So don't feel bad if you do them. I did them too. And I think that with a couple of strategies, you can easily get around them. Along the way, we're going to talk about how to speak concisely and effectively while delivering feedback. And we're going to discuss ultimately how to become a memorable and inspirational evaluator. I know there's quite a few bullet points there, but we'll recap those when we get to the end as well. Okay, there's a couple of rules that I would like to make sure we follow to make this workshop as good as it can be. Rule number 1 is get involved and answer each question if you can. You'll be able to do that through your phone. Everyone's opinion matters. I don't care if you've been a Toastmaster for 10 years or 10 days. Everyone has the chance to share their opinion, and the rest of the group can benefit from it as we go. Rule number 2 is hit that question mark button on your phone if anything's unclear, and then I'll make sure that I say it again, but louder. No, seriously, we'll address anything we need to as we go. That's no problem. And rule number 3 is very, very important, maybe the most important, because rule number 3 is nobody mentioned COVID-19. It's happened. And we are moving on with Toastmasters, with our lives. And if you do mention COVID-19, then you get a 20-minute table topic. I've already cleared it with Danny, or maybe I haven't, but we're going to do it anyway. So nobody mentioned COVID-19. That's the last time I'll mention it as well. We're about to start. So I've got a question for you, because this is going to be useful in understanding what you and everyone else thinks about feedback. The first question is a bit simple. The first question is, do you think feedback is useful? Yes, I'm not sure, or no, it's not useful. Okay, cool. So really quite clear there. 100% of you so far think that feedback is useful. That's how important the topic we are talking about this evening, because feedback and evaluations are the same thing. Everyone thinks that feedback and evaluations are useful. Next question is, what does good feedback look like? What does good feedback look like? So as Toastmasters, as partners, as parents, as friends, we get feedback from time to time, don't we? So what does good feedback look like? And this is really important because we can learn from each other. There's a couple of things popping up, coming in quite fast, actually. So we'll get a couple more and then we'll start looking at them. We've got honest, specific, and constructive. What does good feedback look like? So one of the first one that's on there is honest. And I think this is an important thing for us to discuss at this stage, because it's very easy to not be honest when you're giving feedback, but we can see it's one of the first things that came up. Feedback should be specific, it should be constructive, and it should be useful. I'm glad those have come up, because we're going to look at those in more detail throughout this workshop. As Toastmasters, commend, recommend, commend. I really like that order, ending on a positive. Feedback should be helpful, positive, and encouraging. And I can see it should have both positive aspects as well as constructive criticism. Okay, so we've got an experienced audience here, so this is really worth taking into account. It's got to be constructive with ideas on how to improve. Focus on objectives. We're going to talk about focus shortly as well, but that's a really useful one. Balanced, encouraging, and provide valuable tips to speaker. If anyone feels there's something that's been missed out, then I'd really like you to put it in there. I'm going to add one myself, which is I believe that good feedback is invited. And that's one of the key things about evaluations in Toastmasters, because your evaluation has been invited. In fact, both the speaker and everyone in the room is looking forward to it. So you have a license to say whatever you need to say so that the speaker improves. And one thing that I had over and over again in my life was the feeling that, oh, I can't say that, or that might come too close to the bone. But it's really important as evaluators that we get over that, because our feedback's been invited. Okay, so in Toastmasters, we have a system for giving feedback to speakers, which of course is evaluations. And I would like to know right now, how confident are you currently at giving evaluations? So you're going to say your confidence level. I believe that this one is from 1 to 5. And we're going to measure that confidence level again at the end. So at the moment, right now, how confident do you feel giving evaluations in Toastmasters? Pretty high, nice. We were at, this is really interesting. I did do this workshop a little while ago, and we sat at the very beginning at 3.3. So yeah, very interesting actually. That's where we put ourselves. Okay, so confidence level at the moment, we're going to say 3.3. We're going to have a look again when we come back at the end. Danny, that's how we'll measure me, okay? Lovely. Okay, so what makes a great evaluator? This is going to be useful for us to get from the audience. When you're evaluated, what kind of person do you want to evaluate you? You know, so this is another way for us to get feedback before we start to go into the specifics of what makes an evaluation really good. So I'd like to know from you, what makes a great evaluator? Now, the way that this screen works is if lots of people say the same thing, the word's just going to get bigger. It's a thought cloud essentially. Cool, lovely. So honesty makes a great evaluator. Good listener, attention to detail. Okay, they are coming in fast now. Lovely, we'll get a couple more in and then we'll start to look at them. So the single biggest word on there, which is useful because this is essentially a poll from very experienced Toastmasters. The single biggest thing on there is honest, specific, and clear. In there as well, oh, we have honesty again, considerate, experience makes a good evaluator, good listener, enthusiastic, attention to detail, and constructive. Okay, brilliant. So the 3 big takeaways from that is honest, clear, and specific. So what I'd like to do now is dive into 3 specific ways that I used to make evaluations hard for myself, because I see it all the time. But I've also seen that there are ways that we can overcome it. So the first problem that we always cause ourselves is this: knowing what to comment on. I used to think all the time, what am I meant to say? I can talk about absolutely anything. So where do I even start? In fact, one thing that I hear quite often from Toastmasters is something like, there's so much to fit in. How do I know what to give feedback on? So that's the first problem that we're all going to tackle. And back in 2018, when I was at the very beginning of my evaluation journey, I went to a workshop by a very good Toastmaster called Freddie Daniels. And his workshop was, I believe, called How to Win Evaluation Contests. And Freddie introduced me to something that was completely new to me at the time, which was purpose-focused evaluations. And what Freddie said is the first thing to focus on is, what does the speaker, what are they trying to do? What was the point of their speech? What was the point in the pathways manual? What were their personal objectives? Now, you can't do that in a competition, but in a real evaluation and in real life, that's enormously valuable. Well, I took that knowledge, I ran home with it. Actually, I drove. And at the time I was running a sales team, and I had, I think 8 or 9 people in my sales team. Every week we used to do one-to-ones, me and my team. And it was really a chance for me to pick up on things they'd done wrong. I'll be honest, I wasn't a great boss at that point in my life. And then I took Freddie's advice, and the first person that came and sat down with me in one-to-ones was a guy called Adrian. And I said to him, Adrian, every single week we do these one-to-ones. This is your opportunity to ask me whatever you want and get feedback on anything you need. What do you want to get out of this? Tell me, and we'll base these sessions around you. Well, I was really surprised. He asked loads of really good questions. We had the best one-to-one that we'd ever had put together. The following week, when it was one-to-one Wednesdays, which my team used to shy away from, I got a knock on my door and Adrian came in and said, can we do our one-to-ones now, please? And I realized the power of what I'd learned from Freddie the day before. And so the solution here is, did the speaker achieve their goals? Tailor your evaluation to the goals of the speaker, just as I did in that one-to-one workshop with my team. I asked them, what did they want from me? What did they want me to focus on? What feedback do they need? What's important? And that completely solves the problem of, what do you talk about? Ask the speaker before you go into it. Now, competitions are slightly different. It's our goal, it's our job when we're evaluating to understand what the speaker's point might have been, and then look at whether or not they communicated that well to the audience. The second problem that I used to cause myself all the time, and I see it in other Toastmasters, is in order to be helpful, evaluations must be memorable. Sounds easy, right? No. All the time I hear people say things like, it's hard to make my evaluations memorable because I've got so little time to prepare. At my Toastmasters club, you just have the break to prepare, which is 15 minutes. And at some Toastmasters clubs, you don't even get that break. You've got to start writing your evaluation in the 7 or 8 minutes while the other speakers are up. So how do you know what to do? Well, there is a solution to this, luckily. And what I found is focus your feedback. Be really focused. What am I talking about when I say focus your feedback? Okay, my first rule of thumb is really easy. Don't retell the story from the speech. Your audience sat through that speech just like you did. They remember that it started in downtown Delhi. They remember that the speaker was holding their granddad's hands. You don't need to say that again. What the audience do want to hear is recommendations, commendations, so they can learn from the speech. And so the first piece of advice I would have is, do not retell the story. And the next thing that I would say is, limit your feedback. And personally, I would recommend not giving any more than 2 recommendations and 3 commendations. Because when you limit and focus your feedback, you'll be forced to choose the best recommendations for the speaker. And you'll be forced to choose the best commendations for the speaker as well. So focus your feedback. Personally, I use the framework that, again, back to Freddie Daniels, that he uses in his workshops called Exceptional Evaluations. It's a long workshop. He goes into a lot of detail, and I do recommend that you get onto that workshop if you can as well. And then problem number 3. Oh, someone has unmuted themselves. I don't know. I'm in the wrong view to see who it is. Yeah, lovely. We're all sorted. I have no idea who that was, but thank you very much for sorting out. So problem number 3 that I used to run into all the time. Quite simple. Everyone wants to be original. Now, this is really relevant for competition, where you've got 6, 7, 8 evaluators back to back. You want to be original. How are you going to be original? Well, something I hear all the time is, I've heard Toastmasters say, it's impossible to make recommendations that nobody else has made. What's the solution to that? But luckily, I believe there is one. Back in June 2021, when I found myself in the final of the district competition for the first time, we were presented with an evaluator's worst nightmare. A really brilliant, eloquent, fantastic, inspirational speaker. She was called Yotika, and she gave a phenomenal talk on how her school teacher became a mentor and a role model for her when she was a young girl. The speech was brilliant. In fact, I remember sitting looking at my notes, and I realized I'd listened to the whole 7-minute talk and I hadn't written a single recommendation. There was nothing I didn't like. There was one thing though, which was at one point the speaker, Yotika, had gone to tell us about an acronym. So we know what it is to be a great mentor. Unfortunately, the acronym was so complicated that Yotika herself had forgotten what it was. Now, other than that, There was nothing wrong with the speech whatsoever. And I remember sitting there and I was told we had 5 minutes till we were on, then 4 minutes till we were on, and then I was summoned. And I thought the only recommendation I can make is that it's too simple. It even sounds a bit rude saying, listen, speaker, you forgot what you were saying. And I gave my speech, I gave my intro, I gave my commendations, and I said, there's only one recommendation I can make. And it's quite simple. Do you remember the acronym that our speaker used? No, neither do I. And neither did our speaker. So the only recommendation I would give is if you're going to use an acronym, make sure it's simple enough for you to remember it. And as soon as I said it, I felt really bad because it felt a bit harsh pointing out that a speaker forgot what she was saying. Then I saw the next evaluations after me. I thought they were much better than mine. No one mentioned the fact that the speaker had lost her train of thought. And at the end of that, I was really surprised to have been announced a winner. And when I got feedback from the speaker and from other people that saw the event, they said, it's really simple, Ryan. You're the only one that addressed the real thing the speaker needed to be careful about. And so the solution, I would say, in terms of being original, is start with the obvious. In that particular competition, no one mentioned the obvious thing, which is that our speaker stumbled upon the words. And if you just address the obvious things that you notice, your evaluations and your feedback will be completely original, because no one will give feedback on the obvious things. They'll think the speakers, surely they know it, but actually the speaker might not. So the final thing is always start with the obvious when it comes to recommendations. So with the time that we have remaining, I would like to know from you, for the rest of this workshop, what do you want to focus on? I've selected 5 topics which come up. If we have time, we will do them all. If we only get through 1 or 2, that's okay as well. I've got the timer. I'm actually going to pin the timer here as well. So let's make sure I've got that. Fantastic. Thank you, Matty. So let me know, grab your phone and order from most important to you to least important to you what you'd like us to look at. Making useful notes during the speech. So that's about note taking, essentially. How do you open and close with impact? Addressing the speaker. This is a big debate in Toastmasters. Do you say you or do you? Oh, fantastic. We got some answers there. Yeah, do you say you or do you speak in the third person? How to make your delivery memorable, and choosing which recommendations and commendations you want to make. Okay, brilliant. 6 of you have voted. I'm just going to wait for it to get a little bit higher. When it gets to about 10, I'm going to make a note and then we're going to crack on with those as well. So making useful notes. Sorry about my sniff. The cold air is getting to me. Opening and closing with impact. Cool. So we've got 2 there that are completely neck and neck, basically, which is opening and closing with impact, choosing recommendations and commendations, and then making your delivery memorable. Fantastic. I don't mind that they've swapped places. That's fine with me. I'm coming back into the room and we'll rejoin those slides when we need them. So the first thing we want to look at is there's a bit of play there between opening and closing with impact and making useful notes. So we'll just address them both. I'm going to start with making useful notes. The way that I make notes is the same at every single evaluation I go to, and it's quite simple. I don't go anywhere without a notebook, personally. I believe that the job of my right hand is to carry my notebook. And all I do is at the top of the left page, I'll write down things I like. And at the top of the right-hand page, I'll write down things I don't like. And as the speaker delivers their speech, it's very, very easy to know where I'm going to put those 2 things, because obviously left-hand page, things I like, right-hand page, things I don't like. That really helps me afterwards, because when you're sitting in that 7 minutes, 15 minutes, however long you have to write your evaluation, it means that you basically have a shopping list of commendations and a shopping list of recommendations. And then you can choose which ones are going to work best, which ones are most appropriate for the speaker's mission, for the pathway, which ones are the most important, which are the most obvious. So really simple, there's no tricks here. Don't worry about your grammar, don't worry about it being neat, just make sure it's readable. And after a while, you'll watch the speaker as you make notes. I find that happens a lot as well. So that's making useful notes. The next thing is opening and closing with impact. Well, in that time after I've watched a speech where I'm beginning to prepare to deliver the evaluation, the very last things that I will think about is the opening and closing of the evaluation, because they are 100% the hardest. The commendations are all sorted. They're written down on the left-hand page. The recommendations are all sorted. They're written down the right-hand page. The summary is where you go through those together. What I'll do to write an opening or a closing is I always remember that an evaluation is a speech in and of itself. And so what I'll do is think, how can I hook the audience at the very beginning? It's got to be relevant to the speech as well. So look at the speech title, because often the speech title or the content is a nice way for you to open. So in summary to that, the last thing that you write down, the last thing you decide is the opening and the closing. And the best thing you can do is just open with a statement. Like, for example, our speaker set out today with an objection to stunner. Did she stun us? I believe she did. And let's look at how she did that. The next thing that we want to look at is choosing recommendations and commendations. Well, that's nice and easy, actually, because we've got those shopping lists, haven't we? 2 pages, recommendations and commendations. What I would suggest you do is look for the big 3 in both, because you definitely want to give 3 commendations and 2 recommendations. That's what I recommend. So why do I say no more than that? Well, an evaluation is not very long. And in that time, you want to go into enough detail that it's actually useful. Specifically, if I was giving a recommendation, I need to address how you do that. You can't just stand at the front and say, have more charisma. No one knows what it means and no one knows how to do it. But you could specifically say, remove the cliches from your speeches, because then it will seem more original and your audience will feel your charisma. So I would say recommendations must have a how, and commendations must have a why. Everyone's seen it happen. They know it works. So be an insightful evaluator who can explain why that was a good speech. For example, you might say our speaker opened with a question, and that worked because it drew us in as an audience. Or our speaker didn't open with a question, and that worked really well because we're all used to hearing questions at Toastmasters speeches, and that statement made us interested. So every recommendation, and there shouldn't be more than 2, should have a how, and every commendation should have a why. The evaluations I've seen where I can't remember a single word they said, I keep a tally when I'm general evaluator. And some evaluations have got 10 commendations and something like 7 or 8 recommendations. There's no time, if you do that, to go into any detail. It's not useful at all. So really focus on what you're delivering. And the next one was making your delivery memorable. We hear quite often that an evaluation is in and of itself a speech. And I think the thing that makes speeches memorable, of course, writing's a big part of it, but the thing that makes speeches really memorable is the energy of the speaker. And I can see that there's a couple of questions. Oh, lovely. I might have glossed over something that's really important. What is the difference between commendations and recommendations? I've loved that that question came in. So for anyone who hasn't heard those terms before, commendations and recommendations are long words. A commendation is something that the speaker did well, something that you want to commend. And recommendations is something that the speaker can do better next time. You want to recommend something to the speaker. So I'm really glad that question came up so that we can actually make sure we're on the same page. Every now and again, I hear Toastmasters talk about commends. Well, of course, it's a commendation, not a commend. Commending is something that you do. So I hope that makes sense. So in terms of making your delivery memorable, I think the most important thing to remember with evaluations is there's a lot going on. You're often reading your notes, and that's okay, by the way. I read my notes. I will always read my notes in an evaluation. You're going to be reading your notes, reading the audience, looking at the speaker, remembering what you felt, and probably writing some of your evaluation on the fly in your head because you ran out of time because you had to use the bathroom, and that's all okay. Don't worry about that. The key thing I would say is make sure you bring the energy that you would bring to a speech. And if your club is on Zoom, if you're delivering an evaluation on Zoom, I think that you need an extra 50% of energy, because when you're not in the room, people don't get that face-to-face energy off you. So as much energy as you'd bring to a face-to-face meeting, add on 50%, because that's what you need to do to keep your audience, keep their interest, keep their attention. And of course, if you focus in on how to make those improvements and why the speech works, then I believe you will always have a very memorable evaluation. There's one more thing that it wasn't very popular when we were looking at what the important things were that we wanted to get through. But there is an issue in Toastmasters of addressing the speaker. And so for anyone who hasn't given many recommendations, who hasn't given many evaluations, if I was giving an evaluation right now, I would have to make a choice. I would either have to say to the speaker, you could do this differently next time. Or I would say, I'm just going to pick on a name in the top left corner. I've got, let's have a quick look. Oh, I've got Danny in the top left corner again, no problem. So I'm going to pick on you, Danny. I hope you don't mind. I'd either have to say, Danny, you could have done this differently. Or I would say to everyone, Danny could have done this differently. And I think there's a really clear winner when it comes to how do you address the speaker. We've got a really strange thing in the English language, which is most other languages have a word for you singular and a word for you plural. And this means when you're talking to an audience, you have to choose which one to use. If you use you plural, then they know you're talking to them, but it's not personal. But in English, those two yous have blurred into one. So you can say you're addressing the crowd, but everyone feels that you're speaking to them personally. And you is incredibly powerful. If you reserve you for the speaker who you're evaluating, then you lock out your audience so they don't feel like you're talking to them. And this is a real problem because, especially with new evaluators, when they are delivering particularly recommendations, it feels harsh. So we turn our attention to the speaker and we say, you could do it a little bit differently next time. And as soon as we do that, we've isolated our audience. So my recommendation would be speak about the speaker in the third person. So say Danny rather than you. And this means I'm talking to my audience, but Danny won't feel isolated because Danny's hearing everyone's favorite word, which is their own name. And when you do this, you see the speaker, you see the shine in their eyes, they smile, they're listening to you because you're using their name. But it means that I can say you when I talk to my audience. So I might say, for example, Danny opened with a question. And this was a way that Danny really engaged with us. And so when you give your speeches, you can open with a question too. This means not only have I engaged with Danny, but I've engaged with the audience as well. So the last point I would make is always refer to the speaker in the third person. Otherwise you isolate your audience. So there are 5 things that we wanted to address. They were opening and closing with impact, making useful notes during the speech, choosing commendations and recommendations, making your delivery memorable, and addressing the speaker, you versus the third person. So what have we covered? Well, we've looked at why and when to give feedback. So in terms of why should we give feedback, we had a vote at the very beginning, and everybody in this room, mainly very experienced Toastmasters, you all agreed that feedback is extremely useful. And when to give feedback, there's lots of instances, but I believe it's when it's invited, because that's when it's got the biggest impact. And giving an evaluation in Toastmasters is when it's definitely been invited. We saw earlier that people want you to be honest as well. So how to make feedback useful? Well, it's got to be honest. It's got to be specific. 3 ways that Toastmasters make evaluations hard on themselves and what you can do to avoid it. We've spoken about how to speak concisely and effectively. And really, when it comes to limiting or focusing your feedback, that's what makes, oh, sorry, a couple of things popped up on my screen. That's what makes evaluators speak concisely and effectively. If you come into an evaluation with 8 recommendations for the speaker and 10 things they did well, there's nothing concise about that. Focus your feedback so the speaker knows what they should do differently next time and where they should focus their energy. How to become a memorable and inspirational evaluator. And it's those key elements we looked at, like make sure that you have a great opening. Spend longer on your opening and your closing than any other part of the evaluation. And so what I would like to know is, at the end of the workshop, how confident do you feel delivering an evaluation now? On your phones in front of you, if you open it up, unlock it. Oh, okay, that's a 5. I haven't seen a 5 before. So let's find out how our confidence levels have changed. So we're up to 4.3. Let's see if we can push that. I'm going to wait for us to get to 10. Fantastic. So we started as a group with a confidence level of 3.3. We are now up to 4.2. And there are a couple of 5s in there as well, which I haven't seen before. So that's really fantastic. Now, if you're wondering, well, that's all good, but can you repeat this is my favorite quote from Homer Simpson. Can you repeat the part about the stuff where you said about all the things? No, we're not going to do the whole workshop again, but what we are going to do at the end is a Q&A. And I'm also going to make sure that just for a few seconds, I put my contact details on there as well. I am not an evaluation coach by any stretch of the imagination, but I do really enjoy evaluations. I believe they're extremely valuable, and very, very useful to us as well as a Toastmasters community.
You know Bob Ferguson, he's from my club. When Bob does a presentation, I'm very often asked to evaluate him because everyone listens to Bob and says, oh no, I can't find anything. Your speech is perfect. You know, even as a winner, that is not the case. So how does one find recommendations for speakers who are quite advanced and winners like yourself?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. So one thing that I misunderstood when I first joined Toastmasters is I thought that everyone wants to be evaluated by someone who's more experienced than them, because they can come in and they can mentor you and they can let you know exactly what it is that you need to change to that wishy-washy term, take it to the next level. But what I know now from using the skills I learned at Toastmasters outside in the big bad world is the audiences that Bob talks to from day to day, the audiences that I talk to from day to day, they're not Toastmasters. They are probably don't have experience of standing on the stage. They don't know about the rule of 3. They don't know that you just did an opening. They don't know that you open with a question to draw them in. They're just having an experience. And so everything that you perceive when you're less experienced than another Toastmaster is very valuable. So if there's a line that you don't quite understand, or if you think that someone's socks are distracting, or if you wondered why they put their hand in their pocket, that is absolute gold dust that an experienced Toastmaster would love to have. And when I'm asked, I will always say that I want the least experienced possible evaluator, because I really, really will want someone that can come in and just tell me the obvious stuff that the average person is going to pick when I talk in front of them. So in summary to that question, how do you evaluate someone that's really, really good? Just don't try and overthink it. just listen to them. Think about how it makes you feel. Think about what they did that was confusing, because sometimes experienced speakers will explain things in a really over confusing way. That happens a lot. And really just call them on their jargon and the things that distracted you. And that's the most valuable thing you can possibly do.
I have another one.
Okay.
If you look at the voting slip for evaluation contest, there's 15 points, I think, for the end, that summary bit. So maybe you touched on this, I just missed it, because obviously I've only just joined. Do you always make sure you say that bit in summary so that people hear that and you're summarizing? And also, what constitutes a good summary when you're doing your evaluation?
The slant of this workshop is sort of about how to make sure our evaluations are powerful. However, in competition, it's really important that you have a summary, because as Elizabeth has just said, there's an enormous amount of the proportion of your score that comes from your summary. So what is a summary? Well, a summary is where you're going to cover again, what are the commendations that you made? What are the things that the speaker did well? And what are the recommendations that you made? What could the speaker do differently? The key thing about a summary is you need to signpost it. You've got to say, and so in summary, so that the judges will realize, Ryan's doing a summary. Now I can give him a score for summaries. If you give a summary, but you don't say in summary, then if I do that, it's my own fault if the judges don't realize I just gave a summary. So it's a really brilliant question that you brought up, Elizabeth, and it's not something that we've addressed so far.
Okay. There's a question from Teresa. Could a recommendation be, you are so good, just continue what you're doing?
It could, not in a competition though. So one thing that I think is when you have a new speaker and they're giving their icebreaker. So that's the first speech where they sort of break the ice, they speak about themselves to the club, and it gets them started being a Toastmaster. That would be a good recommendation, I think, if someone really is that good. Give them one thing that they can focus on. And if you don't have more than one thing, then you could say, you're really good. I'd just love to see you here again. Make sure you keep coming. Or even you haven't been coming enough lately. We want to see you more. That would be a really good recommendation, I think. But in a competition, you won't know that about people and it won't be usable enough. And considering in a competition, you're judged by how useful your recommendations are, then it wouldn't be a particularly useful one.
Okay, thank you. Another one from Jan. Are there any extra things you do to shape a competition evaluation versus standard evaluation?
So the question that we had a moment ago was really important in terms of the summary. You must signpost the summary in a competition. The other thing that I would say in a competition speech is cut it down, cut it and cut it and cut it. Because one of the biggest worries that you will have going into a competition is being disqualified for going over on time. Every evaluation contest round I've been in, someone got disqualified for going over on time. Now, they could have been the best evaluator. So the main difference that I would say is really cut it down. Don't small talk. And the way that you do that is by knowing my opening is going to get everyone interested. Then I'm going to address what were the speaker's goals. Then I'm going to go into my commendations, my recommendations, my summary, and then my ending. Don't add anything in the moment, else you will go over. And if you have your summary, and if you cut it down to make sure that you're done by the time the red comes up, that's how you take a really good, friendly, useful club evaluation and turn it into a competition winning evaluation.
Brilliant. Thank you. Another question. Any tips on controlling the nerves?
Oh, I don't know if I'm a good one to ask about this because I get so nervous ahead of competitions that I don't eat. I regularly, after a competition, realize I haven't eaten in 6 hours. So the main thing I would say, my personal experience is the nerves don't go away. So the first thing about managing nerves is you can't see them as a problem. You have to see them as something that's completely natural, because our body is not designed for us to achieve our goals. It's designed for us to survive and replicate. And anything we do beyond that, as far as our body is concerned, is a waste of energy and it's risky. So it will make you feel scared when you're going into situations where you'll be judged by other humans, because it sees it as an unnecessary risk. So in terms of managing the nerves, I would say the first thing is know that they're completely natural. They probably won't go away. The only thing I've found that makes a difference to nerves is how often you've done something. So if competitions scare you, get into every competition you can. And if table topic scares you, then seek out the table topics master at the next meeting and say, please pick on me because I need to get over these nerves.
Brilliant. Another question from Teresa. What is the difference between summary and ending?
Cool, really good question there. So a summary is when you recap what you've spoken about in your evaluation. Then an ending is something impactful that you do that lets your audience know now's the time to clap. And that's what an ending really is in Toastmasters. Now, a nice way to end, I often find, is using the title of the speech if it's appropriate. So let's say a Toastmaster, let's say Mary just gave a speech on how to change the world. So I could give my summary where I say, my recommendations were this, this, and this. My accommodations were this, this, and this. And if Mary does these things, what will happen? I guarantee Mary will change the world. That would be an ending. And my audience will know to clap. A key thing with an evaluation is don't say thank you. Thank you is something that you say when you haven't built to an ending to let the audience know that you've ended. And so the job of the ending is to let the audience know it's done now. I've wrapped it up. Now you can clap. It's appropriate.
Ryan, in the contest, one has 5 minutes to make notes or to refine notes. How do you, as a contest winner, how do you handle that 5 minutes? Do you bother to make notes? Do you just sit and meditate? How do you handle that significant 5 minutes?
So I personally, I'm a writer and I don't mean that I don't write books or anything. What I mean is the way I think is by writing. So what I do is I look back on my list of things that the speaker did well, that things I liked page, and list of the things the speaker didn't do well, so things I didn't like page. And I think, what is the biggest one? I'll stick a 1 next to it. What's the next biggest one? Stick a 2 next to it. And then I'll get a clean page and I'll write down the commendations, the recommendations. So writing it down again is going to start to become part of my memory, and it's also going to form my notes. And then I'm going to, at the end of that, I'm going to write down my intro, and I'm going to write down my close as well. So the most important thing that I will do personally, I won't meditate. I will write down the key things that need to go into the evaluation. And for me personally, that process of writing them down again is an aid memoir. And it also means I've got nice clean notes, because sometimes you come away from listening to a speech and you've filled 2 pages of writing. Well, good luck. Good luck turning that in spaghetti into something useful in front of an audience. You probably won't be able to do it. So I write out the key things that I need to remember.
Brilliant, thank you. We have another question from Michael. What is your advice where you are asked to evaluate 5 minutes before a meeting and scheduled evaluator can't make it?
Oh, okay, really good question. The first thing I would say is just stay calm. probably the biggest thing I would say with Toastmasters is there's never any need to tell the audience that you stepped in at the last minute. There's never any need to tell the audience that it's the first time you do something. A bit of a, I know it's a silly example, but it's one I bring up every now and again in coaching. If I got on a Ryan airplane and I heard the captain say, "This is your captain speaking, we're about to take off, we're going to Fuerteventura," or wherever it is, just so you know, this is my first flight, I would lose a lot of comfort on that plane straight away. Don't tell people it's your first flight, because straight away they'll be looking for the things that you do wrong. And it's the same when you step in. Don't tell people that you stepped in at the last minute. If you don't mention it, then other people will bring it up at the bar and say, you did a really good job stepping at the last minute. If you tell people, then it will look like you're looking for attention. So that's one thing that I would say. And when it comes to actually doing the job of evaluation, the only thing that you lose when you step in at the last minute is the opportunity to speak to the speaker and say, what are your personal goals? You can still grab the agenda and see what their mission is on Pathways, and it probably explains what they're trying to be doing as well. But the only thing you lose is what are their personal goals. So you're not actually at a big disadvantage if you have to step in and do an evaluation.